She called just to check her balance, but the CEO who answered was left stunned by what he discovered about this simple waitress. Comment your city below and hit subscribe to join our global community. This story has an ending that will blow your mind. Megan Carter sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the tiny studio apartment she could barely afford, staring at the crumpled bank statement in her hands. The numbers swam before her tired eyes, blurring together in a way that made her stomach clench with anxiety. 26 years old, working double shifts at Miller's Diner 6 days a week, and still she could barely make rent. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed incessantly, casting harsh shadows across the cramped space that served as her bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once. A single window looked out onto a brick wall, so close she could touch it if she opened the glass. This was her life. This was all she had managed to build for herself after 6 years of working herself to exhaustion. She reached for her phone with fingers that trembled slightly from fatigue. It was 11:30 on a Tuesday night, late enough that she should be sleeping, but her mind refused to quiet. Tomorrow she would wake at 5, be at the diner by 6, and work until 3 in the afternoon. Then she would go home, sleep for a few hours, and return for the dinner shift from 6 to midnight. The same routine, day after day, week after week. Sometimes she wondered if this was all life would ever be. An endless cycle of exhaustion, just barely keeping her head above water. The bank's automated system greeted her with cheerful efficiency when she dialed the customer service number. "Please enter your account number," the recorded voice instructed. Megan punched in the digits mechanically, her mind already half-focused on whether she could afford to buy the new shoes she desperately needed. Her current pair had a hole in the sole that let in water every time it rained. "Your current balance is $47,322.18, the automated voice announced. Megan's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the bed. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she had just heard. 47,000. That was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. She made $9 an hour plus tips. On a good week, she brought home maybe $400. She lived paycheck to paycheck, sometimes choosing between groceries and keeping the heat on. There was no conceivable way her account contained $47,000. Her hands shook as she retrieved the phone and pressed 0 repeatedly, bypassing the automated system to reach a human being. Someone had made a terrible mistake. Someone had deposited money into the wrong account, and if she didn't report it immediately, she could be accused of theft. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. With each passing second, Megan's heart pounded harder against her ribs. "Premium Client Services, this is Daniel Reeves speaking. How may I assist you this evening?" The voice that answered was nothing like the bored, scripted tones she usually encountered when calling the bank. This voice was smooth, cultured, with an underlying warmth that suggested genuine interest rather than professional obligation. There's been a mistake," Megan stammered, her accent thickening the way it always did when she was nervous. Growing up in rural Georgia, she had worked hard to soften her drawl, but stress always brought it rushing back. "I just checked my balance, and it says I have over $47,000, but that can't be right. I'm a waitress. I barely have enough to cover rent most months. Someone must have made a deposit error, and I need to report it before there's legal trouble or something." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Megan heard the soft clicking of computer keys. When Daniel Reeves spoke again, his voice carried a note of something she couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe? Or confusion. "Miss Carter, I'm looking at your account right now, and I can assure you there's been no error. The balance is correct. In fact, you're one of our premium account holders." "That's impossible," Megan said, her voice rising slightly. "I think you're looking at the wrong account. My name is Megan Carter, account number ending in 4723. I work at Miller's Diner in downtown Atlanta. I don't even know what a premium account is, let alone how I would qualify for one." More clicking, longer this time. When Daniel Reeves spoke again, his voice had changed. The professional warmth was still there, but underneath it was something sharper, more alert. This was not the voice of someone going through routine customer service motions. This was the voice of someone whose interest had been genuinely caught. Miss Carter, I'm going to ask you a few security questions to verify your identity, if that's all right. This is for your protection as much as ours. Of course, Megan said, though her hands continued to shake. She answered his questions about her mother's maiden name, her first pet, the street she grew up on. All the while, her mind spun with possibilities, each more unlikely than the last. Had she been named in someone's will without knowing it? Had there been some kind of government settlement she wasn't aware of? None of it made sense. Thank you, Miss Carter. Your identity is confirmed, Daniel said, and now there was something else in his voice. Respect, perhaps. It seemed absurd, but Megan could have sworn that's what she was hearing. I'm going to be completely transparent with you about something that I find quite extraordinary. Looking at your account history, I can see that you've been making regular deposits for the past 8 years. Small amounts, usually between $50 and $200 per month. These deposits have been placed into a high-yield savings account, one of our premium products that typically requires a minimum balance of $25,000 to maintain. Megan's mind reeled back 8 years to when she was 18 and had just started working at the diner. She remembered old Ruth, the head waitress back then, sitting her down during a slow afternoon and talking to her about something Ruth called paying yourself first. Ruth had helped her set up an automatic transfer, $25 from each paycheck, to go straight into savings before Megan could spend it. Even if it's just a little bit, Ruth had said in her gravelly smoker's voice, you put it away first. Every single time. Don't think about it, don't touch it, just let it sit there and grow. I did set up automatic savings, Megan said slowly, trying to piece together the puzzle. But it was only $25 at a time, sometimes a bit more when I had a good tip day. How could that possibly add up to $47,000 in 8 years? A compound interest, Miss Carter, Daniel Reeves said, and now there was unmistakable admiration in his voice. Your account earns 6.5% annually, compounded monthly. Over 8 years, with your consistent deposits, never a single withdrawal, the growth has been substantial. But here's what I find truly remarkable, and forgive me if this is too personal, but looking at your employment and income information on file, you work as a waitress, is that correct? Yes, Megan said, not sure where this was going. At Miller's Diner. I've been there since I was 18. And you've never once touched this money? In 8 years, even though according to our records, you've had months where your checking account balance dropped below $20? There was something in his voice now that Megan couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity exactly. It was more like wonder, as if she had done something he found genuinely impressive. Megan felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassed that this stranger could see the full reality of her financial struggles laid bare in account records and transaction histories. I made a promise to myself, she said quietly. When Ruth helped me set it up, she said that money was for emergencies only. Real emergencies like medical bills or losing my job, not for regular expenses, no matter how tight things got. She said if I could just leave it alone and let it grow, one day it might mean the difference between surviving and actually having a choice about my life. The silence that followed stretched out for several long seconds. Megan wondered if she had said something wrong, revealed too much about how precarious her existence really was. But when Daniel Reeves spoke again, his voice was softer, more human than any customer service representative she had ever encountered. Miss Carter, do you know what the average American your age has in savings? No, Megan admitted. Less than $3,000. Most have significant debt. Credit cards, student loans, car payments, the fact that you have not only saved this amount but done so while living on a waitress's salary, never taking a single withdrawal even during what I can see were some very difficult months. That's remarkable. That shows a level of discipline and foresight that most people twice your age haven't developed. Megan didn't know what to say to that. She had never thought of her savings as remarkable. It was just something she did, a promise she had made to herself and to Ruth's memory after the older woman had passed away 3 years ago from lung cancer. "So the money is really mine?" she asked, still not quite able to believe it. "This isn't some kind of error that's going to be reversed tomorrow?" "It's absolutely yours," Daniel confirmed. "Every penny of it earned through your own hard work and discipline. You are, quite literally, one of our model account holders. The bank actually uses accounts like yours in training materials to show the power of consistent saving and compound interest." Megan laughed, a sound somewhere between disbelief and hysteria. "I'm in training materials? Me? The waitress who sometimes eats ramen for dinner 3 nights in a row because I can't afford groceries until payday. You're the waitress who has built herself a financial foundation that most people only dream about," Daniel corrected gently. "And I have to ask, because I'm genuinely curious, what made you call to check your balance tonight? You haven't accessed this account in 8 years. Megan looked around her tiny apartment, at the water stains spreading across the ceiling that her landlord refused to fix, at the second-hand furniture she had bought piece by piece from thrift stores, at the single pair of work shoes sitting by the door with cardboard stuffed inside to cover the hole in the sole. "I needed new shoes," she said simply. "Mine have a hole in them. I've been putting cardboard inside, but my feet get wet when it rains. I thought maybe I had enough in checking to buy a cheap pair, but I wanted to make sure I could cover my electric bill first. I called to check my checking account balance, but I must have accidentally entered my savings account number instead." Another long pause. Then Daniel Reeves said something that surprised her. "Miss Carter, I'm going to say something that's probably not standard customer service protocol, but I think you should know. What you've accomplished here is genuinely impressive. I work with high net worth individuals all day, people with hundreds of thousands or millions in their accounts. And I can tell you that very few of them showed the kind of financial discipline at 26 that you have. The fact that you called tonight worried about an error rather than excited about found money tells me exactly what kind of person you are." "I don't understand," Megan said. "Why does any of that matter to you? You're just a bank employee doing your job." There was a sound that might have been a small laugh. "You're right, of course. I apologize for getting personal. But if I may make a suggestion, you mentioned needing shoes. You have $47,000 that you've been saving for a real emergency or for a choice about your life. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that taking care of basic needs, your shoes, proper nutrition, perhaps living somewhere without water damage, maybe those aren't luxuries. Maybe those are reasonable uses for a portion of your savings." "But what if something really bad happens?" Megan asked. "What if I lose my job or get sick or, I don't know, my car breaks down beyond repair? I need this money for that." "Miss Carter, even if you spent $5,000 tomorrow on shoes, better housing, building up a proper wardrobe, getting your car serviced, you would still have over $42,000 in emergency savings. That's more than enough cushion for any reasonable emergency. And based on your history, I have no doubt you would rebuild any amount you spent through your continued savings discipline." Megan's mind spun with the implications. $5,000. She could buy shoes, real ones, not the cheapest pair at the discount store. She could move to a better apartment, maybe one with actual heat and without water damage. She could stop eating ramen and actually buy fresh vegetables. The possibilities felt overwhelming, almost frightening in their scope. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "This is all too much to process right now." "Of course," Daniel said, his voice warm with understanding. I'll be here if you have any other questions. My direct line is 555-0147, extension 223. Please don't hesitate to call if you need anything at all. Thank you, Megan said. Really, thank you for being so kind about all this. I thought I was calling to report fraud. I never expected this conversation. The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Carter. It's rare that I get to deliver genuinely good news. Sleep well, and remember, that money is yours. You earned every bit of it. After they said their goodbyes and Megan hung up, she sat in stunned silence on her narrow bed, staring at the phone in her hands. $47,000. Hers. Really, truly hers. Not a mistake, not fraud, but the result of 8 years of small, consistent choices to save instead of spend, to trust in a future she couldn't see instead of focusing only on the present moment. She thought of Ruth, who had died without ever knowing how profoundly her simple advice had impacted Megan's life. "Pay yourself first, honey," Ruth used to say, "even if it's just a little bit, especially if it's just a little bit. That's how you build something real." And now, 8 years later, Megan had built something real. She had built a choice. For the first time in her adult life, she had the financial freedom to make decisions based on what she wanted, not just what she could barely afford. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. She looked down at her worn shoes by the door, at the cardboard visible through the hole in the sole, and made a decision. Tomorrow, after her first shift ended, she was going to buy herself a proper pair of shoes. Not the cheapest ones, not the ones on clearance, the ones that actually fit well and would last. It was a small thing, hardly revolutionary, but it felt like the beginning of something larger, the first step toward acknowledging that she deserved more than just survival. Megan didn't know it yet, but that phone call had changed more than just her understanding of her bank balance. It had caught the attention of a man whose interest, once engaged, was not easily dismissed. Daniel Reeves had not been entirely truthful about his position at the bank. He wasn't just a customer service representative working the late shift. He was the CEO of the entire institution, and he had been covering the premium client services line for a few hours, while his regular staff dealt with a system upgrade. It was something he did occasionally, believing that leadership should understand every level of the business. And in all his years of banking, in all his interactions with clients worth millions, he had never encountered anyone quite like Megan Carter. Her story had touched something in him that he hadn't even known was still capable of being touched. Here was someone who understood the true value of patience, discipline, and delayed gratification. Someone who kept her word, even when no one was watching. Someone who worried about reporting errors rather than capitalizing on them. He wanted to know more about the waitress who had built a small fortune, $25 at a time. He wanted to understand what drove that kind of discipline. And more than that, though he wouldn't admit it even to himself quite yet, he wanted to meet the woman behind the voice, the one who had inadvertently shown him that integrity and strength came in forms he had stopped expecting to find. Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways that had nothing to do with bank balances and everything to do with the man who had just hung up the phone, already planning his next move. And before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave your city in the comments below, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe for more. Now, let's see what happens next. The next morning, Megan woke to sunlight streaming through her single window, a rare occurrence given the brick wall that normally blocked most natural light. For a moment she lay still, wondering if the previous night had been a dream. But when she reached for her phone and checked her bank app, there it was, $47,322.18. Real, undeniable, hers. She got ready for work in a daze, her mind spinning with possibilities, even as her body went through the familiar motions of showering in the cramped bathroom, pulling on her worn diner uniform and stuffing cardboard into her damaged shoes. Today, she kept telling herself, today after work I'm buying new shoes. The thought felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, like she was about to break some sacred rule she had been following for so long she had forgotten why it existed in the first place. Miller's diner was already bustling when Megan arrived at 6 a.m. The morning regulars occupied their usual seats at the counter, Mr. Patterson with his black coffee and wheat toast, Mrs. Chen with her egg white omelette, Tom the construction worker with his massive breakfast special. These people had been part of Megan's routine for 8 years, their orders memorized, their small talk predictable and comforting. "Morning, Meg," called out Barry, the line cook who had been working at the diner even longer than she had. "You look different today. Something happen?" Megan caught her reflection in the chrome coffee machine and realized Barry was right. Despite her exhaustion, despite the worn uniform and damaged shoes, there was something different about her expression. A lightness, maybe, or hope. "Found out I have more money saved than I thought," she said, which was perhaps the understatement of the century. "Good for you, kid," Barry said, cracking eggs onto the griddle with practiced precision. "You've been working yourself to death for years. About time something good came your way." The morning shift passed in its usual blur of orders taken, coffee poured, plates delivered and cleared. But Megan found her mind drifting during the quiet moments, imagining what it might be like to actually use some of her savings. What if she moved to a better apartment? What if she cut back to 1 shift a day instead of 2? What if she went back to school like she had always dreamed, finished her degree in business management? The possibilities felt endless and overwhelming in equal measure. For so long, her life had been defined by necessity and limitation. Every decision had been made based on what she could afford, what she absolutely needed to survive. The idea of making choices based on what she actually wanted felt foreign, almost forbidden. She was refilling Mr. Patterson's coffee when the door chimed, announcing a new customer. Megan glanced up automatically, ready to call out her usual greeting, but the words died in her throat. The man who had just entered was not one of their regulars. In fact, he looked completely out of place in Miller's diner with its cracked vinyl booths and laminate tables. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Megan made in 3 months, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes perfectly tailored to his tall frame. His dark hair was styled with casual precision, and when he removed his sunglasses, Megan found herself looking into the most striking grey eyes she had ever seen. He carried himself with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to worry about money, never having to choose between heat and groceries, never having to stuff cardboard into shoes because new ones weren't in the budget. "Sit anywhere you like," Megan called out, forcing her voice to sound normal and professional, despite the way her heart had inexplicably started beating faster. Rich businessmen sometimes wandered into the diner, usually lost or slumming for what they considered an authentic experience. They rarely came back. The man's eyes found hers across the diner, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. But that made no sense. Megan had never seen this man before in her life. She would have remembered someone who looked like that, someone who commanded attention simply by existing in a space. He made his way to the counter, deliberately bypassing the empty booths, and settled onto a stool directly in front of where Megan stood. Up close, he was even more imposing. Not in a threatening way, but in the way of someone accustomed to being noticed, to having people pay attention when he entered a room. "Good morning," he said, and Megan's world tilted slightly on its axis. She knew that voice, smooth, cultured, with an underlying warmth that suggested genuine interest. She had heard that voice just last night, talking to her about savings and compound interest, and the remarkable discipline she had shown. "You," she breathed, her hand tightening around the coffee pot she was holding. "You're Daniel Reeves, from the bank." He had the grace to look slightly sheepish, which was oddly charming on someone who otherwise appeared utterly composed. "Actually, that's not entirely accurate. My name is Daniel Reeves, that part was true. But I'm not just a customer service representative. I'm the CEO of Pinnacle Trust Bank, and I came here this morning because I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation last night." Megan felt the blood drain from her face. The CEO. She had been talking to the CEO of the bank, telling him about her cardboard shoes and ramen dinners, laying bare the full reality of her financial struggles. Humiliation burned hot in her chest, quickly followed by anger. "You lied to me," she said, her voice low and tense. "You let me think you were just some customer service rep working the late shift. Why would you do that?" "I didn't lie," Daniel said carefully, holding her gaze. "I was working the customer service line last night. It's something I do occasionally to stay connected to what our regular employees experience. And when you called, I answered as I would for any client. I just didn't mention my full position because it didn't seem relevant at the time." "Didn't seem relevant?" Megan's anger flared hotter. "You're the CEO of a major bank, and you didn't think that was relevant information when talking to a customer about her account?" "You're right," Daniel said, and the immediate concession took some of the wind out of Megan's anger. "You're absolutely right. I should have been upfront about who I was. But honestly, Miss Carter, Megan, if I may, by the time I realized I should say something, we were already deep in conversation, and I didn't want to change the dynamic. You were talking to me like I was a real person, not like I was a title or a position. It was refreshing." Megan stared at him, trying to process this information, while simultaneously aware that they were having this conversation in the middle of the diner, with Barry watching curiously from the kitchen and several regulars pretending not to eavesdrop. "That still doesn't explain why you're here," she said finally. "You came to my workplace. How did you even know where I work?" "It's listed in your employment information on file," Daniel admitted. "And I came because I wanted to meet you in person, because your story, your discipline and determination impressed me more than anything I've encountered in years of banking. I wanted to see for myself the woman who had the strength to save for 8 years without ever touching her emergency fund, even when things got difficult." "So this is what, research?" Megan asked, her voice sharp with defensiveness. "You came to observe the poor waitress who saved her pennies? Get a good story to tell at your next board meeting about how noble and disciplined the working class can be." The hurt that flashed across Daniel's face was so genuine and unexpected that it stopped Megan's anger cold. "No," he said quietly. "That's not what this is at all. I came because I was moved by your story. Because in a world where most people, especially people with wealth, have forgotten the value of patience and discipline, you reminded me that those qualities still exist. I wanted to thank you for that." "Thank me?" Megan laughed, a bitter sound. "For what? For being poor but disciplined about it? I didn't save that money to impress anyone or to prove some point about the working class. I saved it because I was scared, because I've been one bad day away from homelessness for 8 years, and I needed to know I had something, anything, to fall back on if things got worse." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes intense and focused entirely on her. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why it's impressive. You weren't saving from a position of comfort or excess. You were saving from a position of genuine need, which makes every dollar you put away that much more meaningful. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How many people I've met who make 6 or 7 figures a year and have nothing saved because they can't delay gratification for a single month?" Megan wanted to stay angry, wanted to maintain her defensive walls, but something in Daniel's voice made it difficult. He wasn't patronizing her. He wasn't treating her like a curiosity or a research subject. He sounded genuinely admiring, almost awed, and she had no idea how to handle that. "Coffee?" she asked finally, needing to do something familiar and routine to ground herself. It's not gourmet or anything, but it's hot and strong. I would love coffee, Daniel said, and the smile that crossed his face transformed him from intimidatingly handsome to dangerously attractive. Thank you. As Megan poured the coffee, her hands not quite steady, she was acutely aware of Daniel watching her. Not in a leering or uncomfortable way, but with genuine interest, as if she was someone worth paying attention to. It was disorienting, being the focus of that kind of attention from someone like him. So, she said, setting the cup in front of him, you run a bank, I wait tables, we had one phone conversation. Where exactly do you think this is going, Mr. Reeves? Daniel, he corrected gently. Please, and honestly, I don't know where this is going, but I'd like to find out. Would you consider having dinner with me sometime? A real conversation, not one constrained by customer service scripts or work environments. Megan stared at him, certain she had misheard. Men like Daniel Reeves did not ask women like her to dinner. They existed in completely different worlds, their paths crossing only in transactions that highlighted the vast distance between their life experiences. Why? She asked bluntly. And don't tell me it's because of my impressive savings discipline. Be honest. Daniel held her gaze, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. Because I can't remember the last time I had a conversation that felt real. Because you challenged me last night without even knowing who I was. Because when I told you that you deserved to spend some of your savings on yourself, you looked at me like I was suggesting something radical and dangerous. I want to know more about the person who reacts that way. I want to understand what shaped you into someone with that kind of strength. Before Megan could respond, Barry called out from the kitchen, "Order up, Meg. Table 4 is getting impatient." Reality crashed back in. She was at work. She had tables to serve, orders to take, a job to do. This surreal conversation with a bank CEO who had mysteriously appeared at her diner would have to wait. "I need to work," she said, already moving toward the kitchen. "I can't just stand here talking." "I understand," Daniel said. "I'll wait. I'm not in any hurry." And true to his word, he sat there for the next 3 hours. He ordered breakfast, then lunch, working on his laptop between conversations whenever Megan had a free moment. The regulars stared. Barry made several pointed comments about fancy company, but Daniel seemed completely unbothered by the attention, focused instead on the moments when Megan would stop by to refill his coffee or clear his plate. What she noticed, despite her best efforts not to notice anything about him at all, was how he treated everyone. He thanked Barry when his food arrived. He made small talk with Mr. Patterson about the weather. He complimented Mrs. Chen on her brooch. He wasn't performing kindness for Megan's benefit. He was genuinely courteous to everyone he encountered, which somehow made him more attractive than his expensive suit or striking features. When her shift finally ended at 3 p.m., Megan found Daniel still sitting at the counter reading something on his laptop. She approached him with her purse over her shoulder, exhaustion weighing down her limbs. "You really waited," she said, surprised despite herself. "I said I would," Daniel replied simply, closing his laptop and standing. "I keep my commitments just like you do. Now, if I recall correctly, you mentioned last night that you needed new shoes. Would you allow me to accompany you shopping? Just as a friend, no pressure or expectations. I'd simply like to spend more time talking with you." Megan knew she should say no. Nothing good could come from spending time with someone so far outside her social sphere, but there was something in the way Daniel looked at her, like she was someone worth knowing, someone interesting and valuable, that made her hesitate. "Just shopping," she said finally. "And you don't buy anything. I have my own money." The words felt strange coming out of her mouth after 8 years of never having enough money for anything beyond bare necessities. But they were true. She did have her own money, $47,000 of her own money. "I wouldn't dream of it," Daniel said, his smile warm and genuine. "After you." As they walked out of the diner together, Megan had no idea that she had just made the choice that would change everything. She didn't know that Daniel Reeves was not just attracted to her discipline and strength, but genuinely falling for the woman who had worked herself to exhaustion for 8 years without complaint, who had kept a promise to herself when no one else was watching, who looked at a windfall of her own money and still worried about emergencies. She would have been amazed to know that this man, who could have anyone he wanted, who lived in a world of endless options and easy luxury, found her cardboard shoes and second-hand clothes utterly irrelevant next to the quality of her character. But that understanding would come later. For now, she was simply a waitress going shoe shopping with an improbably handsome bank CEO, wondering what on earth she had gotten herself into. The shoe store Daniel drove them to was nothing like the discount outlets Megan usually frequented when she absolutely had to replace something. This place had soft lighting, plush carpets, and price tags that made her stomach drop. She stood frozen in the doorway, suddenly very aware of her worn uniform and the lingering smell of French fry grease in her hair. "Maybe this isn't a good idea," she said, taking a step backward. "There's a perfectly good discount store 2 blocks from my apartment. I can go there tomorrow." Daniel turned to look at her, and something in his expression softened. "Megan, you have $47,000 in savings that you earned through 8 years of discipline and hard work. You deserve shoes that fit properly and won't give you blisters. This isn't about impressing anyone or spending beyond your means. It's about taking care of yourself." His words echoed what he had said on the phone, about basic needs not being luxuries. Megan took a deep breath and nodded, stepping into the store with Daniel beside her. A sales associate approached immediately, her practiced smile faltering slightly when she took in Megan's appearance before recovering. "How can I help you today?" the woman asked, her tone professional but cool. "My friend needs comfortable shoes for someone who's on their feet all day," Daniel said smoothly, his voice carrying an edge of authority that made the associate's demeanor shift instantly. "Price is not a concern. Quality and comfort are what matters." Over the next hour, Megan tried on more shoes than she had owned in her entire life. The associate brought out brands she had only seen in magazine advertisements, explaining arch support and cushioning technology and breathable materials. Daniel sat in a nearby chair, offering opinions when asked, but mostly just watching Megan's face light up each time she tried on a pair that felt better than the cardboard stuffed ones she had arrived in. "These," Megan said finally, looking down at a pair of high-quality sneakers that felt like walking on clouds. "How much are they?" $180, the associate said. Megan's immediate instinct was to put them back, to find something cheaper, to not spend that much on herself. But then she remembered Daniel's words. $47,000. She had $47,000. Buying proper shoes wasn't going to ruin her financially. It was actually a reasonable and responsible purchase. "I'll take them," she said, and the words felt both empowering and terrifying. Daniel smiled at her, like she had just accomplished something monumental. "Good. Now, what about something for evenings out? You can't wear work shoes everywhere." "I don't go out much," Megan admitted. "Work takes up most of my time." "All the more reason to have options," Daniel said, "for when you do go out." They ended up buying 3 pairs of shoes, the comfortable sneakers for work, a pair of casual flats for everyday wear, and leather ankle boots that the associate promised would last for years. The total came to just over $500, and when Megan handed over her debit card, her hands were shaking. "Hey," Daniel said softly, leaning close enough that only she could hear. "You earned this money. You deserve to use it. This isn't frivolous spending. This is taking care of your basic needs after 8 years of neglecting them." Megan nodded, but tears pricked at her eyes. She wasn't sure if they were tears of relief, fear, or something else entirely. For so long she had defined herself by what she could endure, what she could sacrifice, how little she could survive on. Choosing to spend money on herself, choosing comfort and quality over mere survival, felt like betraying some fundamental part of her identity. As if sensing her emotional turmoil, Daniel suggested they grab coffee at a nearby cafe. They sat at a small table by the window, Megan's shopping bags at her feet, expensive shoes she still couldn't quite believe she owned. "Tell me about Ruth," Daniel said after they had both received their drinks. "The woman who helped you set up your savings account." Megan looked up, surprised. "How did you remember her name? I only mentioned her once on the phone." "I remember everything you said on that call," Daniel admitted. "It wasn't just another customer service interaction for me. Your story resonated in a way I didn't expect." Megan wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "Ruth was the head waitress when I started at Miller's Diner. I was 18, fresh out of high school, no college plans because I couldn't afford it. My mom had passed away 2 years earlier from cancer, and I was on my own. Ruth took me under her wing, taught me everything about waiting tables, about life, really." "She sounds like she was important to you," Daniel said gently. "She was the closest thing to family I had left," Megan said, her throat tight with emotion. "She died 3 years ago from lung cancer, smoked 2 packs a day for 40 years. I was with her at the end, holding her hand when she passed. One of the last things she said to me was, 'Don't touch that savings, honey. Let it grow until you really need it.' I promised her I wouldn't, and I've kept that promise every single day since." Daniel reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was warm and comforting, not presumptuous or romantic, just human connection. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I think Ruth would be proud of what you've accomplished, and I think she would want you to acknowledge that taking care of yourself is a real need, not a luxury to feel guilty about." Megan laughed wetly, brushing at her eyes. "You didn't even know her. How can you say what she would want? Because she cared enough about you to make sure you had a financial foundation," Daniel said. "That's not the action of someone who would want you to suffer unnecessarily. That's the action of someone who wanted you to have choices and options." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching people pass by outside the window. Finally, Megan asked the question that had been bothering her since Daniel first walked into the diner. "Why are you really doing this? And don't give me the line about being impressed by my savings discipline. There has to be more to it than that." Daniel was quiet for so long that Megan thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful, almost vulnerable. "Do you know what it's like to be surrounded by people who only see your position and your wealth, to have conversations that feel scripted and transactional, to wonder if anyone would care about you if you weren't the CEO of a successful bank?" "No," Megan said honestly. "I've never had to wonder that because I've never had position or wealth for people to be interested in." "Exactly," Daniel said, looking at her intently. "You're real. When you talk to me, you're not calculating what you can get from me or how you can use the connection. You challenged me on the phone, called me out when you thought I was overstepping. You were honest about your struggles without shame or manipulation. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world?" Megan considered this. "So I'm what? A refreshing change of pace? Someone real to interact with before you go back to your actual life?" "Is that what you think this is?" Daniel asked, and there was hurt in his voice. "A temporary diversion?" "I don't know what to think," Megan admitted. "This whole situation is surreal. You're a bank CEO. I'm a waitress. We live in completely different worlds. What happens when the novelty of my authenticity wears off? What happens when you remember that I don't fit into your world at all?" Daniel leaned forward, his grey eyes intense. "What if instead of worrying about fitting into worlds, we just focused on getting to know each other? No expectations, no predetermined outcomes. Just two people who had an interesting conversation and want to have more of them. Is it that simple? Megan asked skeptically. It could be, Daniel said, if we let it. Before Megan could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Barry at the diner. Hey kid, some guy came in asking about you. Seemed sketchy. Wanted to know your schedule. Told him I didn't know anything. Be careful. Megan's blood ran cold. She showed the text to Daniel, whose expression immediately became serious. Do you have any idea who that could be? He asked. Megan shook her head, mind racing. She didn't have an ex-boyfriend or angry former friend. She kept to herself, went to work, went home, repeated the cycle. Who could possibly be asking about her? Maybe it's nothing, she said, trying to convince herself. Maybe just a customer who wanted to leave a bigger tip or something. Maybe, Daniel said, but he didn't sound convinced. But I'd feel better if you were cautious for a while. And if anything else strange happens, please tell me. Let me help. The protectiveness in his voice made something warm unfurl in Megan's chest, even as her logical brain warned her not to get used to having someone care about her safety. People like Daniel didn't stay in the lives of people like her. This was temporary, no matter how genuine it felt in the moment. But as they walked back to his car, Daniel's hand, finding the small of her back in a gesture that felt both protective and intimate, Megan allowed herself to wonder, just for a moment, what it might be like if this wasn't temporary. What it might be like to have someone in her life who saw her not as a charity case or a curiosity, but as someone worth knowing. She didn't know yet that the man asking about her at the diner was someone from Daniel's world, someone who had recognized his interest in Megan and saw opportunity in exploiting it. She didn't know that her simple life was about to get a lot more complicated. But for now, sitting in Daniel's expensive car with shopping bags full of shoes she actually wanted, instead of settling for what she could afford, Megan let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel became a fixture in Megan's life in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. He showed up at the diner every morning, arriving just after she started her shift at 6 a.m. He would sit at the counter, working on his laptop while she served other customers, their conversations happening in stolen moments between her refilling coffee and taking orders. Sometimes he stayed for hours, ordering breakfast and then lunch, seemingly content to simply be in her presence. "Doesn't your bank need you?" Megan asked one morning, pouring him his third cup of coffee. The diner was between the breakfast and lunch rushes, giving them a rare moment of relative privacy. Daniel looked up from his laptop, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I have excellent staff, and thanks to modern technology, I can work from anywhere, including a diner counter where I get to watch the most interesting person I've ever met navigate her day with grace and determination." Megan felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm not interesting. I take orders and pour coffee. That's not exactly fascinating." "You're wrong," Daniel said, his grey eyes intense. "I've watched you handle a screaming toddler by making faces that made him laugh instead of cry. I've seen you remember that Mr. Patterson likes his toast barely browned and Mrs. Chen prefers her eggs cooked in butter, not oil. You remember everyone's preferences, everyone's stories. You make people feel seen and valued. That's not just taking orders, that's creating human connection." Megan had to look away, overwhelmed by being perceived so clearly. "You're romanticizing waitressing," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I'm observing someone who treats every interaction with care and attention," Daniel corrected gently. "That says more about character than any resume or job title ever could." Their evenings together had become routine as well. After Megan's shift ended, Daniel would drive her home, and more often than not, she would invite him up to her tiny apartment. They would sit on her second-hand couch, eating takeout and talking about everything and nothing. Daniel told her about growing up as the only child of a single mother who had built her own accounting firm from scratch, about the pressure he felt to succeed and prove himself worthy of the opportunities he had been given. Megan shared stories about her mother, about growing up poor but loved, about the fear that had driven her savings discipline. One evening, as they sat together watching an old movie on Megan's small television, Daniel reached over and took her hand. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but it sent electricity through Megan's entire body. She looked down at their intertwined fingers, his hand larger and smoother than hers, uncalloused by years of hard physical work. "Is this okay?" Daniel asked softly, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "Yes," Megan whispered, even as her heart raced. "More than okay." They sat like that for the rest of the movie, hands clasped, shoulders touching. It was innocent and sweet, and somehow more intimate than anything Megan had ever experienced. When the credits rolled, neither of them moved. "Megan," Daniel said, turning to face her, "I know we said we were just getting to know each other with no expectations, but I need to be honest about something. This isn't casual for me. What I feel when I'm with you, it's not something I can categorize as simple friendship or curiosity. I'm falling for you. I might have already fallen." Megan's breath caught. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this impossibly kind, impossibly attractive man genuinely cared about her. But fear held her back. "How can you be sure?" she asked. "How do you know this isn't just novelty? The excitement of someone different from your usual world?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes searching hers. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. "Because I've had novelty. I've dated women who looked perfect on paper, who fit into my world seamlessly, and every single one of those relationships felt like playing a role, like we were both performing our parts in some predetermined script. With you, I don't feel like I'm performing. I feel like I'm finally myself, the person I wanted to be before I got caught up in appearances and expectations." "Daniel," Megan started, but he gently placed a finger over her lips. "You don't have to say anything back," he said. "I just needed you to know where I stand. No matter what happens next, I wanted you to know that this is real for me. You are real for me in a way nothing else has been in years." Megan removed his finger from her lips and held his hand against her cheek. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm terrified that I'm going to wake up one day and realize this was all a dream, or worse, that you're going to wake up and realize I don't fit into your life the way you thought I would." "Then we'll be scared together," Daniel said, leaning forward until their foreheads touched, "because I'm terrified too. I'm terrified of losing this, of losing you, before we even have a chance to see what we could be." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Soft and gentle at first, a question more than a statement. Megan answered by threading her fingers through Daniel's hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and desperate, 8 years of loneliness and longing pouring out from both of them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Megan felt tears on her cheeks. "I'm falling too," she whispered. "I've been falling since you walked into the diner that first morning. I just didn't want to admit it." Daniel pulled her close, tucking her head under his chin. "Then fall with me," he murmured into her hair. "We'll figure out the rest together." But their peace was short-lived. The next morning, Megan arrived at work to find Barry looking troubled. "That guy came back," he said without preamble. "The one asking about you. This time he was more aggressive, wanted to know if you had a boyfriend, what kind of car you drove, where you lived. I told him to get lost, but Meg, I'm worried. This doesn't feel right." Megan's blood ran cold. She immediately texted Daniel, who showed up at the diner within 20 minutes, his expression grim. "I'm hiring security for you," he said without preamble. "Someone to keep an eye on things until we figure out who this person is and what they want." "That's excessive," Megan protested. "It's probably nothing." "Megan, someone is actively seeking information about you," Daniel said, his voice tight with concern. "That's not nothing. And please let me do this. Let me make sure you're safe." Before Megan could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her hands shook as she opened it. The message was simple but chilling. "Nice to see you found yourself a rich boyfriend. Bet he doesn't know how desperate you really are." Megan showed the text to Daniel, whose face went white with rage. "That's it," he said. "I'm calling the police. This is harassment." But Megan's mind was racing. Who would send something like this? Who even knew about her and Daniel? They had been careful, keeping their relationship mostly private. The only people who knew were Barry and a few regular customers at the diner. "Daniel," she said slowly, a terrible thought forming, "is there anyone in your life who would want to hurt you? Someone who might see me as a way to get to you?" Daniel's expression shifted, something dark crossing his features. "Marcus Thornton," he said quietly. "My former business partner. We had a falling out 6 months ago when I discovered he was embezzling from the bank. I fired him and threatened legal action if he didn't return the money. He did, but he swore he would find a way to make me pay." "And you think he's targeting me to get back at you?" Megan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's exactly something he would do," Daniel said grimly. "Marcus is vindictive and cruel. If he found out about us, he would absolutely try to use that against me." Megan felt her stomach drop. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, that being with Daniel would complicate her simple, safe life, that his world would intrude on hers in ways she couldn't control. "Maybe we should take a break," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth, "until this is resolved. If this person is targeting me because of you, then putting distance between us might make him lose interest." "Absolutely not," Daniel said firmly. "I'm not letting some vindictive ex-partner dictate how I live my life or who I care about. We're going to handle this together. I'll have my security team investigate Marcus. We'll get police involvement if necessary. But I'm not walking away from you. Not for anything." His intensity both thrilled and frightened Megan. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat back into the safety of her solitary life, where the only person who could hurt her was herself. But a larger part, the part that had been awakened by Daniel's attention and affection, refused to give up what they had found together. "Okay," she said finally, "together. But Daniel, if this escalates, if anyone gets hurt because of me, if anyone gets hurt, it will be because of Marcus's choices, not yours." Daniel interrupted. "You're not responsible for the actions of a bitter, angry man. You're only responsible for your own choices. And right now, what do you choose?" Megan looked at this man who had somehow become essential to her in just 2 weeks. This man who saw her not as a waitress or a charity case, but as someone worth protecting, worth fighting for. "I choose you," she said. "I choose us." Liza, and as Daniel pulled her into his arms, Megan didn't know that Marcus Thornton was already planning his next move, one that would test their new relationship in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The confrontation came 3 days later, in the worst possible way. Megan was working the lunch shift when a well-dressed man she had never seen before walked into the diner. Something about him set her nerves on edge immediately. He was handsome in a cold, calculated way, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his smile not reaching his eyes. "You must be Megan Carter," he said, sliding onto a stool at the counter. "I've heard so much about you." "Can I get you something?" Megan asked, keeping her voice professional despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. "Just coffee and a conversation," the man said. "My name is Marcus Thornton. I believe Daniel may have mentioned me." Megan's blood turned to ice. This was him, the man who had been harassing her, who had been sending threatening texts. "I don't have anything to say to you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You need to leave." "Oh, I don't think so." Marcus said, his smile turning cruel. You see, I have some information about your boyfriend that I think you'll find very interesting. Did Daniel tell you why he really sought you out? Why he came to your diner that first day? He told me everything, Megan said, though her hands were trembling as she poured his coffee. Now please leave, or I'll call the police. He didn't tell you everything, Marcus said, pulling out his phone and sliding it across the counter. On the screen was a document, what looked like an internal bank memo. Read it. It's from a week before Daniel first called you on the phone. Against her better judgment, Megan picked up the phone. The memo was addressed to senior management at Pinnacle Trust Bank. The subject line made her stomach drop. Identifying premium customers for personal investment opportunities. She read through it with growing horror. The document outlined a strategy to identify clients with strong savings discipline and modest incomes, people who might be interested in investment opportunities if approached correctly. And there, in the list of potential candidates, was her name. Megan Carter, highlighted in yellow, with notes about her account history and employment. That was written a week before your miraculous phone call, Marcus said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Daniel didn't answer your call by accident. He specifically waited for you to call, knowing your account details, knowing your situation. Everything that followed, him showing up at your workplace, the shopping trip, all of it was a calculated plan to gain your trust so he could eventually pitch you investment opportunities with the bank. Megan felt like she couldn't breathe. The document looked legitimate, complete with Daniel's signature at the bottom. This can't be real, she whispered. Ask him yourself, Marcus said, standing up and leaving a $20 bill on the counter. Ask your boyfriend if he targeted you specifically because of your savings. Ask him if getting close to you was part of a business strategy. I'll be very interested to hear what he says. After Marcus left, Megan stood frozen behind the counter, her mind racing. Barry came out from the kitchen, took one look at her face, and insisted she take a break. She stumbled to the staff room and immediately called Daniel. Megan, what's wrong? Daniel answered on the first ring, concern evident in his voice. Did you target me? The words came out harsh, accusing. Did you wait for me to call the bank because you had already identified me as a potential investment client? There was a long, terrible pause. Marcus showed you the memo, Daniel said finally, his voice heavy. So it's true? Megan felt tears streaming down her face. Everything, all of it, was just a business strategy? No, Megan, please listen to me, Daniel said urgently. Yes, that memo exists. Yes, I had identified you as someone with impressive savings discipline, but that's not why I came to see you. When we actually spoke on the phone, when I heard your story, it stopped being about business. I came to the diner because I was genuinely moved by you, not because of some investment strategy. How am I supposed to believe that? Megan's voice broke. How do I know any of this was real? Maybe you're just a really good actor. Maybe this is all part of some long game to eventually get me to invest my savings with your bank. Because I haven't once mentioned investments to you, Daniel said desperately. Not once in all our time together have I tried to sell you anything or pitch any financial products. If this was really about business, don't you think I would have brought it up by now? Megan wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to accept his explanation, but the document Marcus had shown her felt like proof that everything she had feared was true. That she was just a curiosity, a project, someone who didn't really belong in Daniel's world. I need space, she said, her voice hollow. I need time to think about all of this. Megan, please don't let Marcus win, Daniel pleaded. Don't let him destroy what we have because of his vindictiveness. What we have? Megan laughed bitterly. How do I even know what we have is real? How do I know I'm not just another client to you, another name on a spreadsheet? You know it's real, Daniel said, his voice raw with emotion. You felt it just like I did. The connection between us, it's not something that can be faked or manufactured for business purposes. I don't know what I felt anymore, Megan said, wiping at her tears. I have to go. She hung up before he could respond, then turned off her phone entirely. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She moved through the motions mechanically, taking orders, serving food, refilling coffee. But inside, she was breaking apart. When she finally got home that night, Megan found Daniel sitting on the steps outside her building. He looked terrible, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed. Please, he said, standing as she approached, please let me explain everything. Not over the phone, but face to face. You deserve the full truth. All of it. Megan knew she should tell him to leave, to protect herself from further hurt. But she also knew that if she didn't hear him out, she would always wonder. You have 10 minutes, she said, unlocking the door to her building. In her apartment, they sat on opposite ends of her small couch, the physical distance between them feeling like an unbridgeable chasm. Daniel took a deep breath and began. That memo was real, he said. I did identify you as someone with remarkable financial discipline. The initial plan was exactly what Marcus said, to approach clients like you about investment opportunities. But Megan, that strategy was abandoned before I ever spoke to you. I had already decided it was inappropriate, too manipulative. When you called that night, I answered because I was covering the service line, not because I was waiting to pounce on a business opportunity. Then why didn't you tell me about the memo? Megan asked. If it was innocent, why hide it? Because I knew how it would look, Daniel admitted. I knew that if you found out I had identified you before we spoke, you would assume the worst, and I was a coward. I should have been upfront about it from the beginning, but I was terrified of losing you before we even had a chance. Megan stared at him, trying to read the truth in his grey eyes. How do I trust you now? How do I know this whole thing isn't just an elaborate manipulation? Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened his email and showed her a message dated 2 days before their first phone conversation. It was from Daniel to his management team, formally cancelling the investment outreach strategy and citing ethical concerns. I ended the program before we ever spoke, he said quietly. Everything that happened between us after that was genuine. I swear to you, Megan, on everything I hold sacred, I did not pursue you for business reasons. I pursued you because you made me feel something I thought I had lost the capacity to feel. Megan looked at the email, then back at Daniel. She wanted desperately to believe him, but the hurt was still so fresh, the betrayal still so sharp. I need time, she said finally. I need to process all of this on my own. How much time? Daniel asked, his voice breaking. I don't know, Megan said honestly, but I can't be around you right now. Every time I look at you, I see that memo with my name highlighted. I see myself as a target, a mark. I need to figure out if I can move past that. Daniel stood slowly, his movements defeated. I understand, he said, but Megan, please know that I love you. I'm completely, hopelessly in love with you. And that has nothing to do with your bank account or your savings discipline. It has everything to do with who you are as a person, the strength and grace and kindness you show to everyone around you. Whatever you decide, that won't change. After he left, Megan sat alone in her apartment, staring at the shoes Daniel had helped her buy, thinking about all the moments they had shared. And she had no idea how she was going to find her way through the pain to figure out what was real and what wasn't. 3 days passed in a fog of grief and confusion. Megan went to work, came home, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Barry, bless him, didn't ask questions, just quietly offered support in the form of extra coffee and concerned glances. The regulars at the diner noticed Daniel's absence, but had the courtesy not to comment. On the fourth day, Megan received a package at work. Inside was a thick folder with a note attached in Daniel's handwriting. The complete truth. Everything I should have told you from the beginning. No more secrets. The folder contained copies of every document related to the investment strategy, including the original memo with her name, the email cancelling the program, and most importantly, time-stamped records showing that the cancellation had indeed occurred before their phone conversation. There were also printouts of his calendar showing that his decision to cover the customer service line that night had been made weeks in advance as part of his regular rotation, not some calculated attempt to intercept her call. But what broke through Megan's defenses wasn't the documentation. It was the handwritten letter tucked at the bottom of the folder. "Megan," it began in Daniel's precise script. "I could fill this letter with apologies and explanations, but I think you deserve more than that. You deserve the truth about who I was before I met you and who I've become since. Before our phone call, I was someone who had forgotten why I went into banking in the first place. I had become obsessed with growth strategies and profit margins, treating people as numbers on spreadsheets. That investment strategy memo was a symptom of how far I had drifted from the person I wanted to be. When you called that night, worried about an error rather than excited about free money, something shifted in me. Your integrity, your discipline, your honesty, they reminded me of my mother, of why she built her business with handshake agreements and personal relationships rather than contracts and cold transactions. I cancelled that program not because I was attracted to you, I hadn't even seen you yet, but because talking to you made me realize how morally bankrupt the whole strategy was. And then I came to the diner because I wanted to meet the person who had inadvertently shown me I had lost my way. Everything that happened after that was real. The attraction, the falling in love, the way my heart races every time you smile, all of it was genuine. But I understand why you can't trust that now. I understand that my failure to be completely honest from the beginning has poisoned everything we built together. I won't ask you to forgive me or take me back. I just want you to know that loving you has made me a better man. And whatever happens next, I will always be grateful that a waitress from Georgia taught a jaded CEO how to see people as humans again rather than opportunities. With all my love, Daniel." Megan read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she looked at the documentation, at the evidence that supported his version of events. Marcus had shown her the truth, but only part of it. The damning memo existed, but so did the cancellation, the ethical concerns, the decision to stop treating people as marks. The question was, could she forgive the lie of omission? Could she trust someone who had kept something so significant hidden, even if his motives for hiding it were understandable? She thought about Ruth, about the advice her mentor would have given. Ruth, who had seen the best in people even when they disappointed her, who believed in second chances and honest mistakes. "Honey," she could almost hear Ruth saying, "the question isn't whether he made a mistake. The question is what he did when he realized he made it. Did he double down and lie more, or did he own it and try to make it right?" Daniel had owned it. He had shown her everything, held nothing back, and then given her the space to decide what she wanted without pressure or manipulation. Megan picked up her phone. "I'm outside," Daniel answered immediately, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been sitting in my car across from the diner all day, hoping you might want to talk. I know it's pathetic, but I couldn't stay away." "Come inside," Megan said softly. "We need to talk." 5 minutes later, Daniel walked into the diner looking like he hadn't slept in days. His suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes red and swollen. He looked nothing like the polished CEO who had walked in a month ago. He looked like a man who had lost everything that mattered. "I got your package," Megan said, gesturing for him to sit at the counter, "and your letter." "I meant every word," Daniel said hoarsely. "I know you did," Megan replied. She poured him a cup of coffee, their old routine feeling both familiar and strange. I'm still hurt that you didn't tell me about the memo from the beginning. I'm still processing the fact that my name was on a list of potential targets. I know, Daniel said, and I will spend the rest of my life making that up to you, if you'll let me. But, Megan continued, her voice stronger now, I also understand why you were afraid to tell me. I understand that fear of losing something precious can make us do foolish things, like hiding truths that should be shared. I've done it too, in different ways. Daniel looked up, hope flickering in his grey eyes. Ruth used to tell me that everybody deserves a second chance if they're willing to do the work to earn it, Megan said. She said the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, but how they handle them afterward. So what does that mean? Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It means I'm willing to try again, Megan said, reaching across the counter to take his hand. It means I believe that what we have is real, even if it started in a complicated way. It means I'm choosing to trust that you love me for who I am, not what I represent in a business strategy. Daniel's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down his cheeks. I love you so much, he said. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love another person. I love you too, Megan whispered, and I'm terrified and hopeful and confused, but I'm also sure that I don't want to lose you. Daniel stood and walked around the counter, pulling Megan into his arms. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other as if they were the only solid thing in a shifting world, while Barry pretended not to notice from the kitchen and Mr. Patterson smiled into his coffee. I promise you, Daniel said into her hair, no more secrets. No more omissions. From now on, complete honesty, even when it's hard. From both of us, Megan agreed, because I haven't been completely honest either. I've been so afraid of not being good enough for your world that I've hidden parts of myself, pretended to be less affected by things than I really was. Then we'll learn together, Daniel said, pulling back to look into her eyes. We'll learn how to be completely ourselves with each other. No performances, no hiding. Together, Megan agreed. And as Daniel leaned down to kiss her, soft and sweet and full of promise, Megan finally understood what Ruth had been trying to teach her all those years ago. That saving money was important, yes, but some things were worth the risk of loss. Some things, like love and connection and the courage to be vulnerable, were worth every penny of the emotional investment required. 6 months later, Megan used part of her savings to enroll in business school. Daniel attended every one of her evening classes with her, sitting in the back row and taking notes like any other student. The bank continued to thrive under his leadership, but he made changes, implemented policies that prioritized ethical treatment of clients over aggressive growth strategies. And every morning, without fail, he still showed up at Miller's Diner at 6 a.m., sitting at the counter and watching the woman he loved serve coffee with grace and kindness to everyone who walked through the door. Some routines, they both agreed, were too precious to change. Hand in hand, they walked into their future together, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in honesty, integrity, and a shared belief that love was worth the risk of falling.